friends. We're getting in the holiday spirit here at the Allender Center, and we have a special gift for you. From Thanksgiving to New Year's Eve, all of our online courses are on sale. This is the biggest discount we offer throughout the entire year. If you have been considering taking one of our courses, such as To Be Told, a course that guides you through knowing your own story, or the Marriage Online Course with Dr. Dan Allender and Dr. Steve Call, now is the time to sign up. All of the online courses from the Allender Center are self-paced, and you get lifetime access, so you can go through them anytime you'd like. Online courses from the Allender Center are a wonderful option if you're looking for a meaningful gift for someone special. Plus, they're delivered straight to your inbox, so you don't have to wait on shipping. Visit theallendercenter.org/offerings and click on online courses to get our best prices of the year now.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
We are in the middle of Advent, and I have the great pleasure of having back on the podcast my dear friend and colleague, Sue Cunningham. Thank you, Sue, for joining me again on the conversation of how you create and decorate to recreate something of the wonder of what Eden is and was, and what the new heavens and earth will one day be. All that to say, the conversation last time was so fun for me. What do you remember, and what do you want to highlight from where we were?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. It's great to be here. Great to be back. I think the thing I love about a conversation like this during the season of Advent is that it really just sparks our imagination, that we're not just like observing, we are participating. Like we're invited in. We're invited into the mystery. We're invited into creativity, God's and our own and our fellow humans. And that's just we've talked about play. It's very fun, but it also really anticipates a lot of goodness because I think that is true about creativity, is there's anticipation for it. And that's what Advent is. It's anticipation of Jesus coming. And I think that we could all use some of that anticipation, some of that hope.
Oh, yes. Well, and in some ways for me, as I started thinking about, the idea of decorating and kind of going around the house. So in going back into the house after the podcast, I'm like looking at all this again, going, wow, this came when we were in Ethiopia, 2006. And again, the people, the conversation, the purchase, knowing something particularly of the women who had been trafficked, who were creating this as a means of both their employment, but also an expression of the faith that they were living into. All that, there is such a intersection between memory and anticipation. There is a kind of different present in this time because so much of our, and I think appropriate nostalgia, that kind of sickness to be back home, while at the same time, anticipation of all that will come. Like one of the things I love is the anticipation of those who will be with us opening gifts and whether there will be truly surprised. Did I hit the mark? Or is it, oh, thanks, Dad, that's a really nice gift, which I'm glad for. I mean, a C, as somebody who didn't do that well in college, C is a really good grade. All that to say, invitation. I'm sorry, I broke.
No, it's great. I was thinking, I think one of the best things I can hear on Christmas is when one of my kids or John will say, "Oh, thank you. This is exactly what I didn't know I wanted."
Yes.
Like, like you knew me at a level that you knew I would love this, and you knew what I didn't even know about me. It's just such a fun way to say that we belong to each other, and there's love, there's mystery, there's creativity, there's play, there's vulnerability. It's all in there.
Well, and one of the phrases you used, I want to come back to, and that is picking up the clues. You've picked up the clues if you get to that point where somebody's like, "Whoa, I didn't know that I needed this at the level that I'm now experiencing." So that feels like, again, the core of the incarnation.
Yes.
The radical disruption, in one sense, the controversy. This is contra, meaning against or upsetting the verse, the structure, the world as we knew it. And that controversy, the incarnation's meant to be controversial. And in that verse disruption, there's something about the presence of God. One of the books I read, and again, I won't claim I read the whole thing every year, but one of the books that's on my, books that are absolutely within 6 to 8 inches reach. I have a nice bookcase along a wall, but the books that are near me and stay near me through a year obviously mean a lot to me. And this book, Thomas Torrance, and it's a book called The Incarnation, The Person and Life of Christ. It's one of those books I read every now and then, like a segment, 10, 15 pages, but particularly at The Incarnation, particularly in this season I read. So I want to read a little bit, not long, don't worry. In Christ, what God communicates to man is not something, but his very self. This is distinct from all other acts of God. This is God's unique act, his reality in the act. And apart from this act, there is no God at all. In the act of creation, God does not communicate himself, but creates a reality wholly distinct from himself. But here in Jesus Christ, God acts in such a way that he is himself in his act. And what he acts, he is. And what he is, he acts. It's just one of those passages that I don't care how odd this makes me, but I can barely read that without tears. That sense of, I love creation. I love trout streams. I love mountains. Literally right now, from when we did our last podcast, it's snowing in Seattle, which, at least for the first day, is wonderful. But because it ices and then freezes and then becomes really a nuisance, at least in the first act of the beauty of creation, is just a glorious beauty around. But all that is not God. He is separate from his creation, even if his creation reflects something of his glory and beauty. But the way that Torrance puts it is that unlike anything else, we are in the presence of God, in the presence of Jesus. And in that act, it is a giving of oneself. So if we can use this phrase, only God creates ex nihilo, out of nothing, something, but not something, himself. And in this regard, we all create not ex nihilo. We create out of something. And in that, our creation is not the same, and yet it reflects. It has a life consistent with the incarnation itself. And so from that, I just want to go, where does your mind go?
Yeah, I love the possibilities. It's like God creates out of nothing and has all the somethings. And then we create out of all the somethings. And so there's so much to create with. Even, you have people that do like trash sculptures. They like go and they find things people have thrown away. You have people creating with paint and words and metal and wood and, like words, just all the things. It's crazy how many things. And then someone will do something completely different because they'll get an idea. And the viewers can look and say, oh my gosh, I was looking at the same thing, but I wouldn't have put those together. And that's the beautiful thing of making something new that wasn't there before. Yes. With a person, with a human, it's just unbelievable, Mm-hmm. And when you have an eye for it, a nose for it, a feel for it, you see creation happening all the time.
Well, and I love that phrase. We create out of something, but in that creation of something, we're actually revealing something of our identity. And in that sense, God creates some things, but in Jesus, he is not creating something. He is creating and revealing himself in a way in which we now know the heart, the mind, the very being of the Father through the presence of the Son. So I don't know if this is a fair parallel, but there's something in our something creation, not ex nihilo, that is revelatory of our engagement with life, with love, with goodness, or with heartache and anger, or all the complexities of what it means to live in a fallen world with a heart and mind toward recreation. So in that, I want to kind of return to that category of what you began to put words to in terms of your poetry, and just a little more of a history for us as to how you came to be able to call yourself a poet.
Mm. Well, it's, as you're talking, I'm thinking about how, like when we see creation, when we see something creative, when we see God's creation, when we apprehend the incarnation, as you've just read, it helps us know God, and it also helps us know ourselves. And then the more we know ourselves, the more it actually helps us know God. And so it's this back and forth dynamic, really, between God and ourselves, and deepening. So a deepening and deepening. And I think for me, to find my identity, which is something I've kind of struggled with, like, that question I've been asking since I was 12, who am I? And still continuing to ask in many ways. And the more I know God, the more I can begin to answer, again, in fragments. But the more I see the fragments, the more I say, oh, this is like God. So for me to say that I will call myself a poet because I believe God put it in me. You taught me that once a while back. You said, like, if you love something, you can be sure that it's because God put it in you. And that just really opened up these worlds for me, because I love color. I love words. I love interplay. I love metaphor. Like, I love so many dimensions of the artistic life or a poetic life. And then to think, oh, because God created me that way. God put it in me. It's very exciting. And so, there was kind of a sense, I was in conversation with someone and they said, well, would you hesitate to call yourself a mother? I said, no. He said, would you hesitate to call yourself a therapist? I'm like, no. Like, those aren't hard. Then why would you hesitate to call yourself a poet? And I was like, oh, it seems even so much more vulnerable than those two. And also just so wonderful, to say, oh, this is part of how God made me. And when I can line up with it and accept it and receive it, it actually opens up worlds for me.
Yes, yes. And yet I want to underline the nouns that we're willing to use, or the nouns we're willing for others to use with regard to us, are some of the most difficult and vulnerable realms. And I fully understand how reluctant you were to use the word poet. And yet, I would have said, literally at least a decade, if not 2 decades ago, of course you're a poet. Because I had the privilege of reading some of your poetry years and years ago, often at a recovery week, often as a means to hold the complexity of the trauma we're in and needing not so much release, but a different kind of engagement with beauty. And so in that sense, I've known you're a poet well before you had. Can I use the word courage? The courage to name that to be true. But the strange interplay of how nouns used are this intersection at one level. One side of the coin is courage. On the other side is incredible vulnerability, to be able to hold that. And I found that to be true for myself. Like, I'm still slightly reluctant to call myself a writer. It's not something I would normally use, but it has become a dear friend offered me the same kind of input with regard to why is it, I'm good to say, oh, I write. The verb is not difficult. It's an action.
Yes.
But something about nouns come to the realm of identity.
I'm glad you're saying that, Dan, because I mean, I've known you for decades, and like, I think it's hard. I don't think people realize how vulnerable it is. I think nobody would think that you would struggle that way. And it's only in conversations where where I've said, oh, this is hard for him, as it would be for anyone. But sometimes we don't realize because we just think that, well, I see it, so it's clear to that person. But there are mysteries that are kept from ourselves for various reasons that our friends and the people near to us can reflect back to us and remind us.
Yeah. And I think that the invitation to our listeners is, what nouns are easy for you? And again, no fault for them being easy. One of the first nouns I would use is, I'm a fly fisherman. Beyond that, certainly husband, father, et cetera, et cetera. But if somebody were to say, what are the nouns related to your sense of calling? I'm a teacher. I get, I'm a speaker. My dear personal assistant calls me a inspirational speaker. And I'm going, do you know what that
just
brings
what you
back
always
to
wanted
mind?
to be. Yeah.
And she goes, oh, you're a motivational speaker. And I'm like, have you ever watched SNL? So the nouns we use easily really do reflect, but that question of what are the nouns that are difficult, yet you'll give a verb to it, but not a noun, becomes the realm of identity. But there's something in the giving of Jesus as the very person, God. There's something about identity. This season is meant to, shall we say, open? I would hope even more than open, to cohere, to have that sense of, I am identified with the babe, Jesus. But also, the incarnation is always moving beyond itself to the ongoing story. But before we get too much further, I want you to take us into the poem that you have offered us. And we'll also not, I don't know how people listen to the podcast, but we'll put the poem up so you have access to its written form rather than just listening. But I do think there's something about listening first before you actually go read, because of the sensuality, because of the rhythm, etc.
Yeah, that's really great, because poetry is, it's auditory, but there are a lot of us that are not auditory, and so we like to see it. But I think that when you asked me, you said, do you have a poem for, the Incarnation or Advent? I'm like, no, I actually don't, but I will get right on that. And so it was fun for me to play and try to dig down into what I might say. But the word I want to use is, and I'm so glad you used the word beauty, is that if there can be like a way to access beauty, and it could be an unlikely beauty. Don't forget, beauty doesn't mean pretty. It's a very deep aesthetic and sensibility. And if beauty can be revealed, which is why I think the arts are really where it's at, to reveal beauty and mystery. So with that in mind, I will read. This poem is entitled Mary and Michelangelo. And the epigraph is After the Pietà by Michelangelo. And if you've never seen that, I would encourage people to Google, to look at the Pietà by Michelangelo, because that is the inspiration, or what was in my mind.
So sequence-wise, it'd be like, listen first.
Maybe first.
Then maybe read, but eventually take a look at that. Yeah,
because it will hopefully there will be layers, and the layers will unfold. Okay. Mary and Michelangelo. Even though Gabriel, the angel, broke God's silence with "Don't be afraid," Mary noticed her shallow breath and the slight tremble of her left hand. His deep question within her hollow, muscular womb. Was she open to being overshadowed by the hovering Holy Spirit? Her gut stirred, her voice steady. Let it be to me. Mary broke down after he vanished, her body free to sob with consent, her left hand cupped open like wordless prayer, wholly virginal, a vessel. Michelangelo understood her when out of Carrara marble he chiseled, shaped, polished her as she cradled her dead son with her right hand, her left hand open, uplifted. When I slowly approached his Pietà, I noticed my shallow breath and the slight tremble of my left hand, Mary's unruffled face, and her left hand held still, palm up, receptive.
Mm-hmm. Now, holy. I again find myself near tears. There's something so holy and, shall we say, altering. Something alters in my perception, not just of the painting, not just of the gift, but of the reception. And so I don't know how to do this other than to say, asking a poet to talk about her poetry feels almost on the border of asking to be allowed to enter the front door. It speaks on the slant powerfully. So if we can do the next portion of this without feeling like I'm asking you to explain the poem.
Right.
That will be the challenge. Because no poet should be asked, what do you mean?
Right. Yes, exactly. I think that's why people sometimes are afraid of poetry, because they're like, I don't know what it means, and it's like, well, it means whatever you think it means and whatever it means to you. So I sort of want to flip the script a little bit, Dan, and say, what moved you, or what did you feel? Maybe that's a better way to say it. I don't know. What did you feel? Was there some place that you felt something or saw something? Or
Sure, that probably is the wiser course, so that I'm not doing but I also am tempted to come back and see if I can get in the side door or break in through.
You a couple things still.
Yeah, but the first is her vulnerability. And again, it's not just a category; it's now languaged. Mary noticed her shallow breath. Now we don't know that from the text, but nonetheless, the story itself, if her breath didn't change, come on, it's almost you have a vision of the Incarnation and her being filled by the Spirit in a way that does not hold mystery. So that simple phrase, her shallow breath, and the slight tremble of her left hand. But in the next shift is this term, muscular womb. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is such a disruption of, yet I go, absolutely. There's something I've never used the phrase muscular womb before. And yet that interplay of that beginning of the frailty, fragility, vulnerability, and yet there is that question. And her gut stirred, her voice steady. Let it be to me. Even the phrase "to me" just strikes me again as genius. Like, not let it be, not let it be me, let it be to me. I see myself as both identity, me, yet also something being done to me. And yet, when it comes into the next stanza, we're back to vulnerability. In terms of she broke down after he vanished, her body free to sob, already back to vulnerability. But what is her sobbing? It's actual consent. So in what has been sometimes, I think, a tragic misunderstanding that Mary was put upon by God, that there wasn't consent. This is a powerful statement of her choice. And so there are sociological, philosophical issues being addressed in a very simple phrase. So as you're building through this, and then you come to Michelangelo, and I read the poem and I was shocked. Like, okay, I saw the title, but I kind of forgot the title in the midst. And so as we come to Michelangelo, and really maybe my way of putting it is, you bring his creativity into play through the open left hand. Now the left hand makes sense. Or I don't know if it's the word sense. It just makes something. And in a way in which now I'm engaged what he knew that I don't know. What did he know that I don't know that you're asking me to know? Yeah. And I'm still not sure what he knew that I don't know, but I'm now pondering that, going, wow. And as he cradled, as she cradled her dead son. So already the incarnation is being spoken to with regard to the crucifixion. And being able to hold the novelty, the joy, the creativity, the imagination, the remembrance with the horror of death. Again, that took me in a way that by the time you bring yourself in, and I'm like, oh, when I slowly approached his pieta, I noticed my shallow breath. And I'm like, I don't know if I can say it fully, but there's something about reading this poem that I felt like was indicative of inviting me to my own shallow breath, to, in some sense, the intersection of both like awe takes your breath away. Wow, that took my breath away. Yet in it, it's a recurrence of what trauma is. And that is literally we become fragmented. So you're asking me to hold awesome and awful, the glory of the incarnation and the horror of his death. And yet all within my palm, her palm, being up, receptive. Yeah. All I can say is, you just wrote that?
Well, you're so much fun. Like, it's so gratifying because, for every word, and this is true for all the poets and writers, you know this in your books, like you labor over every single word. And especially because poetry is condensed language, every word has to count. You can't just, and so I write and then I start slashing, and because it just has to be, lean. But it's fun to hear you, just hear you engage with my creation. Like it's really, really, it's super vulnerable and also super gratifying and exciting and honoring. And I feel like I could weep with that. But I guess I wanted to say about, I've had this relationship with the Pietà by Michelangelo for many years. And what I didn't put in the poem because it didn't work, but when I walked up to the Pietà, I didn't know what it was. I had never heard, I just didn't even know what I was looking at. And I just burst into tears and I didn't even know why. It was just so visceral. And then I've looked and I've studied it and I've studied Michelangelo, every single angle that you can view that at, I've viewed it. And it was her left hand upturned that it just got me. It got me every time because it was that vulnerable consent. And here's, that at the beginning and at the end, she's still open, palm up. And that just means everything. And I also wanted to write this poem just out of kind of audacity that, this is like a perfect piece of art. Like when you look at the sculpture, you'll be like, it almost seems like the sculpture itself is incarnational. I mean, it's so beautiful and perfect. And how did he do it is just mind-boggling. And so how can I put my poem, my little poem, it's not a comparison. It's not like, and we're not at the level of like, well, if we're not Michelangelo, then we can't create. It's more like I'm going to throw my hat in the ring, and this is my offering, and I can enjoy it and play and be in conversation with Mary and Michelangelo and Gabriel and myself. Yeah.
Well, yes, I say amen, but I also want to knock on the door at least one time. What do you make of the left hand?
What do I make of it?
Yeah. Indeed, I agree. Receptive.
Yeah.
But it's not her right hand. It's her left hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do you make of the left hand?
you might be thinking of something that say, like, to me, it is just like so open and vulnerable and other, it's unexpected and it's surrender. And it's not the right hand, it's the left hand. What do you, is that what you're saying? What are you saying? Say it. Just say it.
I think this is, again, the power of interpretation. Nobody gets to go, this is the right interpretation, and therefore all other interpretations are not true. So when we engage in the interpretive act, we're actually addressing, not to be too boring, but we're addressing epistemology. We're addressing how do we know what we know? And then we're coming into the process of going, what's involved in exegesis? What's involved in reading reality? And is there a way to know? It is not a mere skill. It actually is an art in and of itself. Yes, there are skills, no question. To know the original languages, actually a very important tool to engage Scripture. Yet, I think it is a very fair statement that translations are not only sufficient, but multiple translations help you get closer to what the original Greek and Hebrew is inviting you to engage. So again, not to minimize your skill. You have done courses, you have had input from other poets, you've labored to create this skill, yet in it, you're also choosing to use language that at some level is a mystery to you. Is that a fair way?
Very fair. Yeah, because, there's the reality, and, it's somebody else. It's like you've also taught, it's like other people have to tell you what your face looks like. We'll never see your face. And same thing, like you can see things that I can't see, even about what I've just created,
Right. So in that sense, you have to be an interpreter of your own creation. And your interpretation, in some sense, may have a few feet more ahead of the rest of us. But you're still in the race. It isn't that you have already arrived and you're done. I think that's an important category with regard to this power of mystery. And in this case, the power of creativity is those who create often can't fully name what they were hoping to create. So when we come back to the left hand, I just know culturally what's the left hand known for? I won't be too graphic, but the right hand is known for the ability to, shall we say, reach out and touch, because it's the clean hand. The left hand is not the clean hand. And y'all can figure out, if you will, what I might be referring to. But in that sense, it's the most vulnerable hand. It's the dirty hand. It's the complex, human-soiled, broken, in one sense, the hand that most needs to reach out. So in that regard, I think you are inviting us, as you read Michelangelo, but as you wrote Michelangelo, you're inviting us into all creativity, including interpretation, is a mystery of surrender and a vulnerability to be honored, as long as you bless, in one sense, her muscular womb. That I will be, in my little mind, playing with that for a long season. Well, Sue, as we come closer and closer to Christmas, let me just again say thank you for the gift, not just of this podcast, but of your life for the kingdom, and it is a rich gift. And may those who read, look at the Pietà, actually begin to ponder their own privilege of creating in this season. So thank you.
May it be so. Thank you, Dan. This has just been so fun and so creational itself. I had no idea where we were going to go, but I knew it would be fun with you. So thank you. Thank you.
Welcome.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.